At 30 years old, I sat shivering in a sterile oncology ward staring at a $15,000 medical bill for my very first round of chemotherapy. When I called my mother begging for a ride home because I could barely stand on my own 2 feet, her annoyed voice cut through the phone like a knife. She explicitly stated she could not leave the downtown bridal boutique because my sister was having a massive meltdown over French lace. She told me to just call an Uber because my timing was inconvenient. 3 years later, I am completely cancer-free, highly successful, and my parents have lost absolutely everything. When my mother called me sobbing hysterically, demanding that I become her full-time caregiver and financial sponsor, my response took exactly 3 words. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own life and sanity. I am Hannah, 33 years old, and a senior financial risk analyst for a major investment fund in Chicago. But to understand how I could deliver such a cold rejection to my own mother, you have to understand the day that the concept of family officially died for me. It was the day I realized that in the American healthcare system, cancer drains your bank account, but toxic family members drain your soul. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the freezing hospital room. I was hooked up to an IV pole that was dripping a highly toxic cocktail of chemicals into my veins to fight the stage 3 breast cancer ravaging my body. The physical side effects had hit me like a runaway freight train. I was violently nauseous, my entire body was shaking with uncontrollable chills, and my muscles felt like they were turning to heavy lead. Clutched in my trembling left hand was a preliminary billing statement from the hospital administration. $15,000 out of pocket. That was just for this first round. My health insurance company had cruelly denied coverage for a specific anti-nausea medication, and the massive deductibles were already burying me alive. I had driven myself to the hospital that early morning because my parents claimed they had important errands to run in the city. However, they had sworn they would be there to pick me up when the grueling 4-hour session finished. I needed them. For the first time in my fiercely independent life, I truly and desperately needed my mother to hold my hand and tell me I was going to survive this nightmare. I reached for my phone on the metal bedside table. My fingers felt completely numb as I dialed her number. It rang 4 times before going straight to voicemail. I swallowed down the bile rising in my throat and called again. On the third attempt, my mother Carol finally answered the call. The background noise on her end was chaotic, filled with upbeat classical music and the shrill chatter of excited women. "Mom," I whispered, my voice cracking dangerously as another wave of severe nausea rolled over me. "The session is over. The nurse says I am cleared to go, but I cannot drive my car. I cannot even walk straight right now. Are you almost here to get me?" There was a sharp, dramatic sigh on the other end of the line. "Hannah, your timing is really incredibly difficult right now," my mother said, her tone dripping with intense irritation. I blinked heavily, entirely confused by her cold response. The harsh fluorescent lights of the oncology ward seemed to flicker above me. "Difficult, Mom. I just finished 4 hours of chemotherapy. I am vomiting into a plastic hospital basin." "I know you are not feeling your best," she interrupted, speaking quickly and in hushed tones, as if my cancer was actively embarrassing her in public. "But your sister is having an absolute crisis right now. We are at the luxury bridal boutique downtown. Isabella is having a complete meltdown. The seamstress messed up the custom French lace, detailing on the train of her gown, and the wedding is only 6 months away." She is in tears, Hannah. "I absolutely cannot leave her side right now. It is a disaster." I stared blankly on the hospital wall, the ridiculous words echoing in my ears. A disaster. My sister Isabella, the aspiring social media influencer who was marrying a fast-talking guy with big dreams and empty pockets, had a minor lace defect on her dress. That was classified as a disaster. Meanwhile, I was fighting a literal battle for my life against aggressive cancer cells, holding a medical bill that was going to drain every last cent of my life savings. "Mom," I begged, abandoning whatever dignity and pride I had left. "Please, I am begging you. I cannot stop shaking. I just need my mom. Oh, for heaven's sake, stop being so dramatic, she snapped, her voice raising in anger. You are 30 years old. You are sitting in a highly supervised medical facility. You are perfectly safe where you are. Isabella is hyperventilating in a fitting room and needs her mother. Just call an Uber. It is only $50 to get back to your apartment. We will call you tomorrow when things settle down here. This dress situation has to be fixed today. Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The profound realization of my place in this family hit me harder than the harsh chemotherapy drugs coursing through my system. I was the scapegoat. I had always been the scapegoat. Isabella was the untouchable golden child, and her superficial wedding aesthetic took absolute precedence over my fight against a terminal illness. I did not cry. The tears simply refused to fall. Instead, a cold, hard knot of pure survival instinct formed deep in the pit of my stomach. I looked down at the $15,000 medical bill in my lap. My parents had explicitly promised to help me with these overwhelming costs. They possessed a massive joint savings account they always bragged about, claiming it was strictly for family emergencies. But I knew in that exact moment with crystal clarity that not a single cent of that money would ever go toward saving my life. It would go toward imported French lace. It would go toward expensive catering and extravagant floral arrangements for a one-day party. I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, her face softened with genuine sympathy as she saw me violently shivering. I need to be discharged right now, I told her, my voice eerily steady, despite the physical agony I was enduring. She carefully removed the IV needle from my arm and taped a small cotton bandage over the bruised puncture site. She kindly offered to wheel me down to the lobby in a chair, but I refused. I gathered my belongings, walked my trembling body to the hospital billing department, and handed over my personal credit card, wiping out a massive chunk of the financial safety net I had worked years as a risk analyst to build. I walked out into the freezing Chicago air and ordered a ride. Sitting in the back seat of that stranger's car, battling intense waves of sickness and exhaustion, I opened my phone contacts. I found my mother's number. I pressed delete. I found my father's number. I pressed delete. I found Isabella's number. I pressed delete. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself as the city skyline blurred past the car window. I was going to fight this cancer entirely on my own. I was going to survive. I was going to rebuild my wealth. And I was going to excise these toxic people from my life as ruthlessly as the surgeons had excised the tumor from my body. I walked into my empty apartment that evening, locked the heavy deadbolt, and officially became an orphan by choice. 3 years is a long time in the corporate world, but it is an absolute eternity when you are fighting for your life. Fast forward exactly 36 months from that freezing night outside the oncology ward. I am 33 years old, officially in remission, and my hair has grown back into a sharp, sleek bob that perfectly matches my professional reputation. I did not just survive the poison they pumped into my veins to kill the cancer. I let that same toxic precision reshape my entire personality. Today, I am a senior financial risk analyst for one of the most ruthless investment funds in the country. My daily job involves dissecting failing corporate structures, identifying massive liabilities, and excising them before they can destroy an entire financial portfolio. I took that exact same highly aggressive corporate strategy and applied it to my personal life. My sanctuary is a minimalist, ultra-modern penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. The environment I built is completely sterile of drama. I purchased this luxury space with the massive performance bonuses I earned by being the most calculating, unbothered analyst on my trading floor. When you realize that you can face the terrifying reality of death entirely alone, the intimidation tactics of wealthy old men in corporate boardrooms completely lose their power. My peace is absolute. I maintain a strict no-contact policy with my biological relatives. I have not spoken a single syllable to my mother, Carol, my father Thomas, or my golden child sister Isabella in 3 full years. I did not attend Isabella's lavish destination wedding. I did not send a baby gift when she gave birth to her child. I simply vanished from their narrative, allowing them to live in the artificial status-obsessed reality they valued over my actual life. I became a ghost who just so happened to have an exceptional stock portfolio and zero emotional baggage. The silence I cultivated was expensive, hard-won, and fiercely protected. My building requires keycard access for the elevator, and my personal phone number is unlisted. I spend my weekends attending high-intensity Pilates classes, trying out expensive new restaurants with colleagues who only know me as a powerhouse financial expert, and enjoying the profound quiet of my home. There are no messy family obligations. There are no passive-aggressive guilt trips over holiday dinners. There is only the crisp, clean reality of a life I built entirely with my own two hands. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my custom Italian leather sofa, reviewing a highly confidential risk assessment file on my tablet while sipping a glass of $200 Cabernet. The floor-to-ceiling soundproof windows displayed a brilliant, icy sunset over Lake Michigan. The temperature control was perfectly set. The ambient jazz was playing at a low volume, and my mind was entirely focused on a merger and acquisition deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Then the silence was abruptly shattered by the buzzing of my personal cell phone. I glanced at the glowing screen resting on the marble coffee table. It was an unsaved number. However, my brain, trained to analyze data and retain complex numerical sequences, instantly recognized the local area code and the specific digit pattern. I had intentionally deleted that exact number while standing outside the hospital billing department 3 years ago. The human mind holds on to the architecture of trauma in very strange ways. It was my mother. I stared at the device as it vibrated violently across the smooth glass. The rational, highly paid risk analyst inside my head screamed at me to let it ring. Engaging with a known liability is terrible business practice. Answering this call would be the equivalent of investing capital into a bankrupt company with a proven history of fraud. It defied all logic. But another part of me, a colder, darker part, that had been forged in the agonizing fires of chemotherapy and medical debt, felt a sudden surge of curiosity. What could possibly drive a woman who abandoned her cancer-stricken daughter to break 36 months of absolute silence? She had not called when I rang the bell to signify the end of my radiation treatments. She had not called on my birthdays. Why now? Against my better judgment, and perhaps driven by a dark sense of anticipation, I reached out and tapped the green accept icon. I brought the phone to my ear and said absolutely nothing. I refused to be the first one to speak. I just sat in the stillness of my penthouse and waited. The line was filled with the sound of ragged, heavy breathing, followed instantly by hysterical, chaotic sobbing. Hannah Carroll wailed, her voice cracking with a level of raw desperation I had never heard from her before. "Hannah, please tell me you are there. I need you. I really need you right now." I took a slow, measured sip of my Cabernet, letting the expensive wine coat my tongue as the sounds of her breakdown echoed through the quiet room. She was not calling to apologize. The frantic pitch of her voice told me this was not a moment of maternal regret or a sudden realization of her past cruelty. This was the sound of a woman who had run out of options and was frantically grasping for a lifeline. She was crying hysterically, hyperventilating into the receiver, completely shattering the 3 years of perfect peace I had constructed. I kept my breathing steady, my facial expression completely blank, and allowed her to cry, waiting for the inevitable demand that I knew was about to follow. I let the frantic sobbing continue for a full 60 seconds before my mother finally caught her breath. When she spoke, her words were slurred, lacking the crisp, condescending articulation I remembered from my childhood. "I had a stroke, Hannah," she gasped, her voice shaking with uncharacteristic panic. "A stroke last month. The doctors say I am partially paralyzed on my entire left side. I cannot walk up the stairs anymore. I cannot even dress myself without help." I sat perfectly still. My risk analyst brain processed this information with the exact same clinical detachment I used when reviewing a failing corporate quarterly report. There was a sudden medical crisis. There was a severe loss of physical function, but there was zero emotional resonance within my chest. I felt absolutely nothing. And your father, Carol, continued her weeping, escalating into a frantic, breathless pitch. Thomas is completely broke. I do not understand how it happened, but the emergency savings are gone. The retirement accounts are empty. The hospital is threatening to discharge me to a state-run rehabilitation center because we cannot afford private and home care. We have absolutely nothing left. My eyes narrowed slightly. The financial math simply did not add up. My parents had boasted about their massive joint savings account for my entire life. That was the exact same pool of money they had promised to use for my cancer treatments before suddenly deciding that Isabella needed a $12,000 floral arrangement instead. An account of that magnitude does not simply evaporate into thin air, even with the astronomical costs of the American healthcare system. Someone had drained it. I remained silent, allowing her to fill the void. I called your sister, Carol sobbed, her tone shifting to a bizarre mix of defensive justification and deep resentment. I begged Isabella to let me move into the guest room of her house, but she said no. She said Trey needs that extra room for his tech startup. He needs a dedicated server room and a home office because he is the founder and CEO. Plus, they have the new baby now. Isabella claims she is just too stressed and overwhelmed with postpartum anxiety to take on the burden of a disabled mother. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet. The sheer magnificent irony of the situation washed over me like a warm wave. The golden child, the daughter whose minor dress-fitting emergency had taken absolute precedence over my terminal cancer diagnosis, had just discarded our mother the very second she became an inconvenience. Isabella was entirely useless in a crisis, and her husband Trey was apparently prioritizing a makeshift home office over his paralyzed mother-in-law. The toxic family dynamic was finally eating itself alive. When Carol realized I was not going to offer immediate sympathy, her tone abruptly shifted. The hysterical crying stopped, replaced by the familiar, demanding entitlement that had dictated my entire existence before my illness. So here's the plan. My mother announced, her voice hardening with the assumption of my unconditional compliance. You are single. You do not have a husband or any children to take care of. You have that massive apartment in the city, and you work remotely on your computer all day. It makes perfect logistical sense. I am going to have your father pack up my medical equipment, and I will be moving into your spare bedroom on Monday morning. You will need to assist me with my physical therapy exercises and handle my meals. It is your duty to step up now that your sister is occupied with her own family. I listened to the unbelievable audacity radiating through the phone speaker. There was no apology for the past 3 years of absolute silence. There was no inquiry about whether my cancer had returned. There was not a single moment of maternal remorse for abandoning me to face my own mortality alone. She simply viewed me as a free, convenient resource, a built-in nurse, a financial safety net she felt entitled to claim because she deemed my single childless life to be less valuable than Isabella's status as a married mother. She expected me to sacrifice my hard-won peace, my immaculate penthouse, and my demanding career to bathe and feed the exact same woman who told me to call a $50 Uber while I was vomiting chemotherapy drugs into a plastic basin. She wanted to reap the benefits of the financial stability I had built entirely on my own, completely ignoring the fact that she had left me to drown in medical debt. Hannah, are you listening to me? Carol demanded, her frustration peaking as the silence stretched on. I need you to text me your building access code so your father can bring my wheelchair up on Monday. I looked out at the brilliant Chicago skyline. I felt the luxurious leather of my custom sofa beneath my fingertips. I thought about the $15,000 medical bill I had paid entirely by myself, the nights I had spent shivering alone in a cheap apartment, and the ruthless strength I had forged from their total abandonment. I brought the phone closer to my mouth. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not engage in a screaming match or demand the apology I knew I would never receive. I simply spoke with the absolute chilling authority of a woman who owed this family absolutely nothing. Try GoFundMe. I pressed the red end call icon. Then, with a single tap of my finger, I blocked the number permanently. I set the phone face down on the marble table, picked up my wine glass, and went right back to analyzing my corporate merger files. The silence that filled the penthouse was profoundly beautiful, and my peace remained entirely undisturbed. My perfect peace lasted exactly 14 hours. Wednesday morning in Chicago was brutal and gray, the kind of weather that perfectly matched the sterile high-stakes environment of the investment firm where I worked. The lobby of my corporate building is a fortress of imported Italian marble-polished glass and armed security guards in tailored suits. It is designed specifically to keep unauthorized liabilities out. I walked through the heavy revolving doors at precisely 7:45, holding my black coffee, my mind already running complex risk algorithms on a volatile tech portfolio. I was wearing a charcoal gray tailored blazer, my professional armor. I approached the security turnstiles, reaching into my leather tote for my encrypted access badge. I felt utterly untouchable. The voice echoed sharply off the marble walls, cutting through the low hum of professional networking and the clicking of expensive dress shoes. It was not a polite morning greeting. It was an accusation. I froze, my badge hovering an inch above the optical scanner. Nobody in this building called me by my first name with that specific whining inflection. My colleagues addressed me by my title or my surname. I turned around slowly, my risk analyst instincts instantly shifting from corporate portfolios to personal threats. Standing directly in the center of the expansive corporate lobby, positioned perfectly to block my path to the elevators, were my sister Isabella and her husband Trey. They had bypassed the outer security desk by lingering in the public artisan coffee shop attached to the lobby, waiting like predators for me to make my morning approach. I analyzed them with the same ruthless efficiency I applied to fraudulent corporate balance sheets. Isabella looked carefully curated for the role of the overwhelmed desperate victim. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses to hide her eyes, a luxurious cashmere wrap thrown hastily over her shoulders, and holding a perfectly staged crumpled tissue. Beside her stood Trey. My African-American brother-in-law was dressed in a bespoke midnight blue suit that screamed newly minted chief executive officer. I noted the hand-stitched lapels, the custom silk pocket square, and the $2,000 Italian leather loafers. He was dressed like a man who had successfully secured a massive Series A funding round, which made his presence here aggressively begging a financial analyst to house his disabled mother-in-law incredibly hypocritical. Before I could say a single word or summon security, Trey closed the distance between us. He deliberately raised his voice, ensuring his booming baritone echoed across the polished floors to reach the maximum number of ears. "You are a cold-hearted monster," Hannah Trey announced, his tone dripping with self-righteous venom and calculated theatricality. Several senior partners and junior analysts stopped in their tracks, turning their heads to watch the drama unfold. Trey wanted an audience. He wanted to leverage my professional environment to publicly shame me into total submission. "I cannot even begin to comprehend the level of absolute selfishness it takes to hang up on your paralyzed mother," Trey continued, stepping aggressively into my personal space to physically intimidate me. "In my culture, family is everything. We take care of our elders. We honor the people who gave us life. We do not throw them away like garbage just because they become inconvenient to our selfish lifestyles." He swept his arm out, gesturing dramatically to the luxurious, towering lobby surrounding us. He was painting a very specific picture for my colleagues to witness. "You sit up here in your corporate ivory tower making millions of dollars, while the woman who birthed you is about to be tossed into some underfunded, horrific state facility. You have no children. You have no real responsibilities. Isabella and I are drowning trying to raise a newborn while I build my startup from the ground up. It is your fundamental duty to take Carol in. You owe this family." Right on cue, Isabella initiated phase 2 of their ambush strategy. She let out a loud theatrical sob that carried perfectly across the room. She clutched Trey's expensive silk sleeve, burying her face into his shoulder as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "I cannot do it anymore, Hannah," Isabella wailed, ensuring every passing executive could hear her manufactured agony. I am so overwhelmed with postpartum anxiety. The baby kept me up all night, and now mom needs 24-hour medical care. How could you be so evil? You survived cancer, but it is like your heart completely died in that hospital bed. You have no soul left. Mom is terrified and crying, and you just told her to use GoFundMe. What is wrong with you? The whispering began. I could see the sideways glances from the corporate associates holding their briefcases. In the high-stakes financial sector, reputation is currency. Isabella and Trey had banked their entire strategy on the assumption that I would do absolutely anything, including surrendering my home, my wealth, and my sanity, to avoid a scandalous public scene in front of my senior directors. They fully expected me to panic. They expected me to cry, to apologize, to usher them quickly through the security gates, to hide them in a private conference room where they could extort me in peace. But they had made a catastrophic miscalculation in their risk assessment. They thought they were dealing with the frightened, desperate 30-year-old cancer patient they had callously abandoned 3 years ago. They did not realize that the grueling chemotherapy had burned away every last ounce of my compliance, leaving only cold, hard steel behind. I did not feel panic. I felt a hyper-focused, icy clarity. I looked at Isabella's waterproof mascara completely unsmudged, despite her loud, racking sobs. I looked at Trey's custom-tailored suit, my brain instantly running the numbers on the exact cost of the imported fabric and the high-end tailoring. I knew exactly where the capital for that bespoke suit had come from. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my coffee cup perfectly steady in my hand. I let the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch for a long moment, allowing the sheer audacity of their public accusation to settle over the lobby. The armed security guards were watching me closely, hands hovering near their radios, waiting for my signal to intervene and physically remove the threat. I did not give the signal. I was going to handle this massive liability myself, right here in the open, directly on my own territory. I did not break eye contact with Trey. I let his self-righteous heavy breathing fill the space between us. The corporate sharks surrounding us had paused their morning commutes, forming a loose semicircle of highly interested spectators. Isabella sniffled loudly again, trying to prompt my emotional collapse. Instead of cowering, I slowly shifted my coffee cup to my left hand. I reached into my leather tote bag with my right hand and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen with a single fluid motion. I did not look angry. I looked entirely bored. I tapped open my social media application and navigated directly to Isabella's public profile. She had hundreds of thousands of followers she updated daily, which meant her digital footprint was a massive goldmine of financial evidence. I scrolled back exactly 3 years. My thumb moved with lethal precision through hundreds of staged maternity photos, luxury vacation posts, and curated aesthetic updates until I found exactly what I was looking for: the massive, highly produced destination wedding album. I tapped on the primary cover photo, expanding it to fill the entire screen and turned the brightness all the way up. I held the device up right between Trey's face and Isabella's fake tears. "Do you recognize this photograph?" I asked, my voice calm, projecting perfectly across the quiet marble lobby so that every single eavesdropping executive could hear me clearly. Isabella stopped crying instantly. She stared at the glowing screen, her perfectly shaped eyebrows knitting together in total confusion. The image displayed her standing at the altar of a breathtaking luxury resort. She was wearing a custom couture gown. Trey was standing next to her in a vibrant, meticulously tailored tuxedo. But what dominated the frame was the floral arrangement. Cascading walls of rare imported pink peonies wrapped around the entire altar and overflowed from Isabella's massive bridal bouquet. It was a masterclass in financial excess. Trey shifted his weight, his expensive leather loafers squeaking slightly against the polished floor. "What does our wedding day have to do with you abandoning your sick mother?" he demanded, trying to steer the narrative back to his moral high ground. I lowered the phone slightly, locking my eyes onto his. "It has absolutely everything to do with it," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy register. "Let us talk about those traditional family values you just spent the last 5 minutes screaming about in my lobby," I said, Taking a deliberate step forward, I pointed a manicured finger at the screen. That beautiful, oversized bouquet of imported French peonies you are holding in this picture cost exactly $12,000. The floral arches behind you cost another $30,000. I know the exact numbers because I audited the billing statements before I cut contact. My parents paid for every single petal. They paid for it using the exact joint savings account they had explicitly promised to use to cover my out-of-pocket chemotherapy bills. I let that piece of information detonate in the dead silence of the room. I watched the blood completely drain from Isabella's face. Her fake victim persona shattered into a million pieces. The surrounding partners and junior analysts exchanged shocked glances. The public shaming they had attempted to inflict on me had just been violently reversed, leaving them entirely exposed in front of the very crowd they tried to weaponize against me. I turned my attention back to Trey, running my eyes slowly up and down his immaculate outfit. And that beautiful handcrafted midnight blue suit you are wearing right now. I continued, my tone razor sharp. That costs roughly $5,000 from the luxury tailor downtown, a tailor my father introduced you to. You are standing here dripping in luxury goods funded entirely by my parents' depleted retirement and savings accounts. You drained them dry to fund your fake chief executive officer lifestyle and your lavish wedding aesthetic. And now that the money is completely gone and Carol has become a severe medical liability, you have the absolute audacity to dump her on my doorstep and call me a monster. Trey opened his mouth to speak, but his booming baritone had completely vanished. He stuttered, looking around at the wealthy executives who were now glaring at him with pure disgust. Isabella shrank back, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around herself, utterly humiliated now that her perfect social media facade had been violently ripped apart in public. I took one final step closer to Trey, invading his personal space just as he had done to me minutes earlier. I looked him dead in the eye, ensuring my voice carried the full weight of my survival. Do not lecture me about family values when you are wearing my radiation treatments on your back. I turned my head sharply toward the main security desk. The lead guard, a tall man who had known me for years, immediately stood at attention. Gentlemen, I called out, my voice ringing with total authority. These two individuals do not have clearance to be in this building. Please escort them off the premises immediately. If they resist, call the police and press trespassing charges. I did not wait to watch the guards descend upon them. I turned my back on my sister, and her fraudulent husband swiped my encrypted badge across the optical scanner and walked through the turnstiles. The heavy glass elevator doors slid shut behind me, completely sealing away the pathetic sounds of Isabella trying to explain herself to the security team. I pressed the button for the 50th floor, took another sip of my coffee, and went to work. By noon, I had successfully finalized the risk assessment for a major tech merger and sent it to the executive board. My heart rate was steady, my mind clear. But while I was busy dissecting corporate liabilities, Isabella was frantically busy constructing one. The notification arrived precisely at 1:15 in the afternoon. It was a direct message from a junior analyst who worked on the floor below me, containing only a link and a brief text asking if I was okay. I clicked the link on my secure terminal. It redirected me to Instagram, specifically to Isabella's public influencer profile. She had wasted absolutely no time. Furious from her public humiliation in my lobby, she had retreated to the safety of her meticulously curated digital echo chamber to launch a digital smear campaign. The video she posted was a masterclass in modern social media manipulation. She was sitting in what looked like a sterile hospital waiting room, though I instantly recognized the beige-patterned wallpaper of her own overpriced suburban guest bedroom. She was wearing an oversized, neutral-toned sweater, her makeup professionally applied to look deliberately undone and raw. The video started with a deep, shuddering breath. Then came the tears. She stared directly into the camera lens and began to weep, claiming that her cancer survivor sister had lost her soul. She told her hundreds of thousands of followers that I had become a cold corporate monster who had abandoned our dying, paralyzed mother to rot in poverty. She weaponized all the right internet buzzwords. She called me a toxic narcissist. She claimed I was engaging in financial abuse against vulnerable elders. She conveniently omitted the $12,000 peony bouquet, my grueling radiation treatments, and the undeniable fact that she and Trey had flatly refused to take Carol into their own massive home. It was a heavily edited, perfectly lit performance designed to turn the internet into a personal hit squad. In the modern American social media landscape, outrage is the single most valuable currency on the market. Isabella's video did not just get views, it caught fire. The algorithmic machinery of the internet thrives on black and white narratives, and Isabella had served them a perfect villain. I watched the view count tick upward in real time, jumping from 50,000 to 500,000 in a matter of hours. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of absolute strangers judging my entire existence based on a 60-second weeping performance. People who had never met me, who knew absolutely nothing about the agonizing reality of facing chemotherapy completely alone, were leaving thousands of hateful comments. They called me a disgrace to women. They said my cancer survival was a tragic waste of medical resources. They demanded that my corporate employer fire me immediately for lacking basic human empathy. The mob mentality was staggering. Internet psychologists with ring lights began posting stitches of her video, diagnosing me with dark triad personality traits based entirely on Isabella's fabricated narrative. Other influencers, desperate to siphon off some of the viral engagement, began posting reaction videos. They stared solemnly into their front-facing cameras, offering fake prayers for my poor mother, while shamelessly plugging their own affiliate discount codes in the caption. Isabella was actively fanning the flames. She pinned comments calling for my professional ruin and posted tearful replies thanking her community for supporting a struggling mother of a newborn. She was ruthlessly monetizing my private family trauma to boost her engagement metrics and secure more brand deals for her page. Then came the flying monkeys. My personal cell phone began vibrating with an endless stream of text messages from extended family members. My Aunt Beatrice, who had explicitly told me she was too busy hosting a neighborhood book club to bring me soup, after my surgical operations texted me a massive paragraph calling me a disgrace to the bloodline. My cousin, who had borrowed $5,000 from me years ago and never paid it back, posted a public status declaring he was officially cutting me out of his life. The digital witch hunt had breached the walls of my real life. For a brief fleeting moment, the human inside me wanted to fight back. The instinct to pull out my own camera record, a raw video exposing the truth about the wedding flowers and the stolen chemotherapy funds, was incredibly strong. I wanted to scream my defense into the void. I wanted to humiliate her to her entire digital audience and clear my name. But I am not a frantic social media influencer. I am a senior financial risk analyst. I do not deal in emotional outbursts. I deal in hard data, calculated leverage, and total destruction. Responding online would only give Isabella exactly what she wanted. It would give her more views, more engagement, and more victimhood currency. It would validate her public tantrum. I recognized this digital smear campaign for exactly what it was. It was a massive data leak. It was a liability that needed to be contained and neutralized through official, undeniable channels. I closed the social media application. I opened my phone settings and completely disabled all notifications. I blocked the incoming text messages from the extended family without reading another single word they wrote. I placed the phone face down on my mahogany desk. The ambient noise of the trading floor outside my glass office remained steady. I took a deep, centering breath, completely locking away my anger in a steel vault inside my mind. I was not going to fight Isabella in the court of public opinion. I was going to crush her in the court of financial reality. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed a private number I kept specifically for high-level corporate emergencies. I did not call a public relations firm to manage the scandal. I called a ruthless private forensic accountant, a man whose entire career revolved around unearthing hidden financial rot for billionaire clients. He answered on the second ring. His voice was sharp and discreet. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I gave him the full legal names of my mother Carol, my father Thomas, my sister Isabella, and my brother-in-law Trey. I need a complete financial autopsy, I instructed him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I want every single bank account, every line of credit, every mortgage document, and every wire transfer scrutinized. I want to know exactly how a massive retirement fund vanished into thin air. I want to know exactly who signed the checks. Leave no stone unturned. The accountant did not ask questions. He simply confirmed the receipt of the names and promised a preliminary file within 48 hours. I hung up the receiver. Isabella thought she was going to win a war using fake tears and internet sympathy. She had no idea that I had just authorized a financial strike that would permanently dismantle the entire illusion of her perfect life. I turned back to my dual monitors, pulled up my next corporate risk portfolio, and went back to work. The remainder of my workday was an exercise in extreme compartmentalization. While my professional mind navigated the complex algorithms of international trade, my personal phone sitting face down on the polished mahogany desk continued to vibrate with a relentless angry rhythm. The digital smear campaign Isabella had orchestrated was operating exactly as designed, mobilizing the classic toxic family defense mechanism. The flying monkeys had been officially unleashed. By the time I returned to my penthouse that evening, the sheer volume of harassment was staggering. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, sat at my kitchen island, and finally turned over the device. The notification screen was a glowing monument to familial hypocrisy. There were dozens of text messages, voicemails, and direct messages from extended family members who had not spoken a single word to me in 3 years. My Aunt Beatrice, who conveniently claimed she was too busy attending a neighborhood wine tasting to drop off groceries after my double mastectomy, had sent a massive block of text. She called me an ungrateful disgrace to the family bloodline, demanding I immediately drive to the hospital and beg on my knees for my mother's forgiveness. My Uncle Paul, a man who had famously dodged my calls when I was desperately trying to borrow $500 to keep my electricity on during my medical bankruptcy, left a scathing voicemail. He shouted that my corporate success had turned me into a cold, ruthless monster, and that I owed it to my parents to provide financial support in their old age. Cousins I had not seen since high school flooded my inbox with identical, heavily emotional lectures about the sacred duty of family. It was a highly coordinated, multi-directional assault designed to break my resolve through sheer emotional exhaustion. They were using shame as a weapon, banking on the societal expectation that a daughter must unconditionally sacrifice herself for her parents, regardless of the abuse she endured. But they fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were attacking. I did not feel shame. I felt a profound, almost clinical sense of vindication. Their collective outrage was not born of genuine love for my mother. It was born of fear. My absolute refusal to play the role of the compliant self-sacrificing scapegoat threatened the entire family ecosystem. If I refused to carry the burden would inevitably fall on them. They were not defending Carol out of loyalty. They were attacking me out of self-preservation. I did not reply to a single message. Engaging with irrational hostility is a guaranteed loss on investment. Instead, I treated the incoming vitriol as a massive data collection exercise. I opened a secure encrypted cloud folder on my personal laptop and named it Family Liabilities. Operating with the same detached efficiency I used to process corporate risk portfolios, I began taking screenshots of every single text message, social media comment, and direct message. I meticulously logged the timestamps, the sender names, and the exact nature of their demands. I downloaded the abusive voicemails and saved them as audio files into the digital vault. This was my armor. Every hateful word they typed became documented legal evidence. I was building an impenetrable fortress of proof against any future claims of elder abuse or neglect they might try to leverage against me. By refusing to engage, I starved their outrage of oxygen. I maintained my absolute boundary of no contact, allowing their aggressive messages to echo into the void. They wanted a screaming match. They wanted me to defend myself so they could twist my words and further fuel Isabella's victim narrative. I gave them absolutely nothing but deafening, impenetrable silence. 48 hours later, the preparation phase ended and the execution phase began. The private forensic accountant arrived at my penthouse precisely at 8 o'clock on Friday evening. He was a sharply dressed, utterly discreet professional named Mr. Thorne. He did not offer warm pleasantries or ask about my day. He simply walked into my living room, accepted a glass of water, and placed a thick encrypted hard drive on my marble coffee table. He understood that we were not here to socialize. We were here to perform a financial autopsy. We sat across from each other at my dining table, the city lights illuminating the space around us. I opened my secure laptop, connected the drive, and entered the decryption password he provided. A massive directory of financial records, bank statements, property deeds, and credit histories materialized on my screen. The data encompassed every financial move my mother, my father, Isabella, and Trey had made over the past 5 years. "I have compiled the preliminary asset tracking report," Mr. Thorne said, his voice flat and analytical. "As requested, I followed the liquidity. The financial architecture of your parents' estate is completely unstable. There are massive capital hemorrhages that directly contradict the narrative of a sudden medical bankruptcy." I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted bank statements. "Talk to me about the retirement accounts," I instructed, pulling up a spreadsheet that detailed my father's historical investments. Thomas always bragged about his fully funded retirement and the emergency savings trust. Carol claims those accounts are completely empty and the medical bills from her recent stroke drained them. "Show me the timeline." Mr. Thorne tapped his pen against the table, pointing to a specific column of data. "The timeline is fabricated," he stated bluntly. "Your mother's medical expenses from the stroke are substantial, yes, but they are entirely covered by her premium medical policy. Her out-of-pocket costs over the last month amount to roughly $12,000. That is a significant hit, but it is absolutely not enough to trigger total insolvency for a couple with their previous net worth. The retirement accounts were not drained by medical debt. They were systematically liquidated months before the stroke even occurred." I felt a cold thrill of realization wash over me. The puzzle pieces were beginning to snap together with devastating clarity. If the medical bills did not bankrupt them, what did? Mr. Thorne pulled up a secondary file, this one focusing on recent wire transfers. "The capital was intentionally redirected," he explained. "We are looking at a pattern of severe financial mismanagement and highly questionable asset transfers. A massive portion of their liquidity was funneled directly into secondary accounts that do not belong to Thomas or Carol." I stared at the screen, my heart beating with the steady, measured rhythm of a predator locking onto its target. The flying monkeys were outside my walls, screaming about my moral obligations, while the real parasites had been quietly bleeding the family dry from the inside. I adjusted my posture and focused my attention entirely on the glowing numbers. "Open the wire transfer history." I commanded, my voice carrying the absolute certainty of a woman about to dismantle an empire. "Show me exactly where every single dollar went. Let us find out exactly what my sister and her husband have been hiding." Mr. Thorne tapped a few keys on his laptop, bringing up a complex web of financial transactions that traced the movement of capital over the past 18 months. The screen illuminated a staggering reality that immediately contradicted my mother's desperate, tearful narrative. This was not a sudden, tragic medical bankruptcy. This was a slow, deliberate, and entirely voluntary financial suicide. "Let us look at the primary retirement fund," Mr. Thorne said, dragging his cursor over a series of massive withdrawals. "Exactly 14 months ago, your father Thomas initiated a penalty liquidation of a significant portion of his 401k. The withdrawal incurred heavy tax penalties due to early access. The total liquid capital secured was $250,000. I stared at the staggering figure. $250,000 drained from a protected retirement account and subjected to massive penalties. That kind of desperation meant a severe crisis or a profound delusion. "Where did it go?" I asked, my voice steady, though my mind was racing through the possibilities. "It did not go to medical bills. Carol's stroke had only occurred last month." Mr. Thorne brought up a secondary document, a wire transfer receipt authorized by Thomas. The entire sum of $250,000 was transferred via certified wire to a commercial banking account registered under a Delaware limited liability company named Apex Innovations, LLC. I felt a cold smile begin to form on my lips. Apex Innovations, LLC. The name sounded exactly like the kind of meaningless buzzword, heavy corporate entity a man in a bespoke suit would invent to sound important at networking events. Pull up the corporate registration for Apex Innovations, I instructed, though I already knew exactly whose name would be listed as the primary managing director. Mr. Thorne obliged, opening a state business registry file. The LLC was registered precisely 15 months ago. The sole registered agent and managing director is listed as Trayvon Davis. Trey. The man who had stood in my corporate lobby less than 48 hours ago wearing a custom $5,000 suit screaming at me about my lack of family values and my selfish refusal to support his disabled mother-in-law. He had publicly shamed me for not opening my home and my wallet, all while he was actively sitting on $250,000 of my parents' retirement savings. He had drained their future to fund his startup fantasy, leaving them completely destitute when a genuine medical emergency finally struck. Is the company operational? I asked, shifting into full risk analysis mode. What is the current liquidity of Apex Innovations? Mr. Thorne brought up another spreadsheet, this one detailing corporate banking records. The company has virtually zero operational revenue. It is effectively a shell. The $250,000 capital injection was not utilized for product development, payroll, or any legitimate business operations. It was rapidly depleted through what appears to be aggressive personal expenditures masked as corporate expenses. Show me the itemized ledger, I demanded, the picture becoming clearer by the second. We spent the next hour dissecting Trey's fraudulent empire. The data was damning. Trey had used my parents' retirement fund as his own personal piggy bank to fund the lavish lifestyle of a successful tech founder, completely bypassing the actual requirement of building a successful company. There were massive deductions for luxury car leases, including the high-end Porsche he frequently posted on his social media. There were exorbitant charges at five-star restaurants, high-end tailors, and exclusive country club memberships. He was literally wearing my parents' financial security, playing the role of the wealthy CEO while bleeding them dry. And Isabella, I asked, pivoting to the golden child, what is her financial footprint in this disaster? If Trey is burning through the startup capital, how is she funding her influencer lifestyle? Mr. Thorne nodded, pulling up a new set of data focusing on personal credit histories. Isabella and Trey maintain entirely separate personal finances, though they are legally married. However, Isabella's spending habits reveal another significant hemorrhage in your parents' financial structure. Over the past 2 years, Isabella has been listed as an authorized user on 3 of your father's primary high-limit credit cards. I leaned back in my chair, the magnitude of their audacity truly taking my breath away. She had a blank check. Precisely, Mr. Thorne confirmed. She has systematically maxed out all 3 accounts. The cumulative debt across these specific credit lines currently sits at roughly $50,000. The charges are almost exclusively related to luxury retail, high-end cosmetics, international travel, and expensive baby boutiques. She has been funding her entire online persona using Thomas's credit lines. I sat back and let the silence of the penthouse settle around me. The narrative my family had constructed was completely unraveling. Carol and Thomas were not tragic victims of a cruel healthcare system. They were victims of their own blinding favoritism. They had willingly handed over the keys to their financial kingdom to Isabella and her fraudulent husband, prioritizing their daughter's superficial status over their own long-term security. And now that the well was completely dry and a real crisis had emerged, they expected me, the scapegoat they had abandoned during my cancer battle, to step in and absorb the catastrophic liability they had created. They expected me to sacrifice my penthouse, my career, and my peace to wipe their slate clean, allowing Trey and Isabella to continue living their delusional luxury lifestyle, completely unbothered by the consequences of their actions. I closed my laptop with a soft, definitive click. The investigation had yielded everything I needed. The trap was now fully constructed, The bait was set, and I held every single advantage. I turned to Mr. Thorne. Compile all of this data into a secure encrypted presentation file. I instructed him, my voice completely devoid of mercy. I want the wire transfers, the credit card statements, and the corporate expense ledgers verified and ready for immediate deployment. They are going to try and corner me legally. When they do, I want to have every single weapon loaded. Mr. Thorne packed his equipment with efficient precision. Consider it done, he said before quietly letting himself out of the penthouse. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Chicago. The flying monkeys were still raging online. Isabella was still playing the weeping victim for her followers. My father was undoubtedly plotting his next move to force my compliance. They all thought they were engaged in a moral crusade against a heartless daughter. They had absolutely no idea that I was about to drop a financial nuclear bomb directly on top of their carefully constructed house of cards. I took a deep, calming breath, feeling an immense, powerful sense of anticipation. The battle lines were drawn, and I was more than ready for war. The first official strike from my father arrived exactly 72 hours later. It did not come in the form of an angry text message or another pathetic social media stunt by my sister. It arrived wrapped in the cold, unforgiving machinery of the American legal system. I was stepping out of my building, handing a coffee to my doorman, when a man in a wrinkled gray windbreaker suddenly stepped into my path. He did not look like a corporate professional. He held a thick, sealed manila envelope in his right hand. He locked eyes with me, asked to confirm my full legal name, and the moment I nodded, he thrust the heavy envelope against my chest. He uttered the 4 words that can make even the most seasoned financial executive feel a sudden spike of adrenaline. You have been served. I stood on the bustling Chicago sidewalk, the morning wind biting at my coat, and tore open the heavy seal. The document inside was a formal legal summons. The bold black text at the top of the complaint read, "Petition for filial support." I walked straight back up to my penthouse, locked the door, and spread the documents across my kitchen island. My risk analyst brain immediately began tearing the legal jargon apart. Filial responsibility laws are an obscure, archaic piece of legislation still active in a handful of states. They were originally designed decades ago to prevent impoverished elderly parents from becoming a burden on the state welfare system. The law essentially dictates that an adult child who possesses sufficient financial means can be legally forced to cover the unpaid medical and housing debts of their indigent parents. It is a terrifying legal trap, and most Americans do not even know it exists until a nursing home or a bitter family member weaponizes it against them. My father had hired a lawyer to do exactly that. I read through the specific demands. The lawsuit was seeking a court order to garnish my wages and seize my personal assets. Thomas was legally demanding that I pay exactly $8,000 every single month to cover the cost of a luxury assisted living facility for Carol, plus the cost of her ongoing physical therapy and out-of-pocket medical expenses. The lawsuit conveniently omitted the fact that Thomas had voluntarily drained his own retirement accounts to fund Trey and his fake tech startup. It painted a tragic, heavily fabricated picture of an elderly couple bankrupted by a sudden stroke, cruelly abandoned by a wealthy, selfish daughter who refused to provide basic care. The psychological warfare of receiving a subpoena from your own father is incredibly difficult to articulate. It is a very specific type of betrayal. When I was fighting stage 3 breast cancer, I could not even get this man to drive me to a chemotherapy appointment. I had to empty my own meager savings to avoid medical bankruptcy, while he paid for Isabella's imported wedding flowers. Now that I was finally healthy, successful, and financially secure, he had hired a lawyer to legally force me to fund his life. He was using the court system to reach into my bank account and steal the peace I had built with my own 2 hands. I looked at the name of the attorney representing my parents. It was a man notorious for aggressive, loud, and incredibly messy civil litigation. Thomas had not hired a quiet, dignified estate lawyer. He had hired a legal bulldog whose entire business model revolved around harassing people into rapid, out-of-court settlements. The strategy was painfully transparent. Thomas thought he had successfully checkmated me. He knew exactly what kind of corporate environment I worked in. The investment banking sector despises public scandals, messy family lawsuits, and any kind of negative press that might reflect poorly on a firm. Thomas was banking on my fear of professional embarrassment. He firmly believed that I would look at this lawsuit, panic about my corporate reputation, and immediately write a massive check just to make the legal threat disappear. He thought he could use my hard-earned wealth as a weapon against me, squeezing me in a legal vice until I submitted to his extortion. I felt a sudden, intense wave of physiological stress hit my system. My heart pounded heavily against my ribs, and my breathing grew shallow. This was the lingering trauma response, the terrified inner child reacting to the overwhelming power of parental authority. For a brief, terrifying second, the sheer weight of the legal system felt like a mountain poised to crush me. $8,000 a month, for the rest of Carol's life. They wanted to turn me into their permanent financial hostage, effectively making me pay a massive monthly ransom just to keep my name out of the public court records. I stood up, walked into my bathroom, and turned on the cold water faucet. I splashed the freezing water over my face, forcing my vagus nerve to reset, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I traced the faint, barely visible scar near my collarbone where my chemotherapy port used to be. I had survived poison. I had survived the literal threat of death. I was absolutely not going to be intimidated by a piece of paper signed by a desperate, fraudulent man who had handed his life savings to a con artist in a bespoke suit. I walked back to the kitchen island and picked up the summons. The initial shock had entirely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. Thomas had made a fatal error in his risk assessment. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He assumed that because I maintained a strict no-contact boundary, I was afraid of conflict. He did not understand that my silence was not a retreat. It was a tactical advantage. By filing this specific lawsuit, Thomas had inadvertently opened the door for complete legal discovery. To prove that he was legally indigent and entitled to my money under the filial responsibility law, he would be forced to open his own financial books to the court. He would have to explain exactly where his $250,000 retirement fund went. He would have to legally swear under penalty of perjury about the massive wire transfers he sent to Trey and the credit card debt Isabella had racked up under his name. He thought he was trapping me, but he had just handed me the exact legal mechanism I needed to destroy him. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my personal attorney, a vicious corporate litigator who thrived on destroying fraudulent claims. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt the sharp, thrilling anticipation of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. I instructed my lawyer to accept the summons. We were not going to settle. We were going to court. Less than 2 hours after the process server ambushed me on the sidewalk, my personal phone began to vibrate with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Thomas was not a man who possessed the patience to let the legal system run its natural course. He was a man who wanted immediate gratification. He wanted to hear the panic in my voice. He wanted to revel in the absolute certainty that his aggressive intimidation tactics had successfully broken my spirit. I took a deep breath, consciously lowering my heart rate, and tapped the green accept button. I brought the phone to my ear and maintained total silence. I let him speak first. "Well," Hannah Thomas said, his voice dripping with a sickening layer of smug satisfaction. "I assume you received the package I sent over this morning? I hope the delivery was not too disruptive to your busy corporate schedule." His tone was incredibly grating. It was the exact same condescending cadence he used to employ when I was a teenager struggling with my math homework, the voice of a patriarch who firmly believed he held absolute intellectual and moral superiority over everyone else in the room. "I received the summons," I replied, keeping my vocal register completely flat and devoid of any emotional inflection. "I am reading through the petition right now. $8,000 a month is a rather substantial demand, Thomas." He chuckled, a dark, arrogant sound that echoed through the receiver. "It is a necessary demand. Your mother requires specialized medical care, and as her highly successful, wealthy daughter, the state law clearly dictates that you are financially obligated to provide for her. We did not want to involve the courts, Hannah. We really did not. But your cruel, selfish behavior left us with absolutely no other alternative. You forced my hand. I leaned against the kitchen island, staring out at the Chicago skyline. And what exactly happens if I decide to fight this petition in a courtroom? Thomas let out another sharp, triumphant laugh. He thought he had me entirely cornered. He believed I was probing for a way out because I was terrified of a public legal battle. "You are not going to fight this," Hannah Thomas stated with absolute, unwavering arrogance. "You work in high-level risk analysis for a conservative investment firm. Your entire career is built on a foundation of pristine public reputation, extreme compliance, and fiduciary trust. I know exactly how those corporate executives operate. If you decide to drag this out, my lawyer is fully prepared to subpoena your employer. We will send a detailed copy of this filial responsibility lawsuit directly to your Human Resources Department. We will make sure every single senior partner at your firm knows that you are legally fighting to abandon your paralyzed mother. We will drag your name through the mud and your pristine corporate reputation will be completely destroyed. They will fire you before the trial even begins." He paused, letting the heavy weight of his extortion settle over the line. "But we can make all of this go away quietly," Thomas continued, shifting seamlessly from aggressive threat to fake benevolence. "My lawyer has drafted an out-of-court settlement agreement. You sign a legally binding contract committing to pay the $8,000 every month, plus a lump sum of $50,000 to cover our immediate legal fees and past medical debts. You sign the paper, you set up the direct deposit, and the lawsuit completely disappears. Your Human Resources Department never hears a single word about it. It is a simple, clean business transaction." I closed my eyes and allowed a brief, calculated sigh to escape my lips. I needed to feed his ego. I needed him to believe that his psychological warfare had successfully pierced my armor. The art of corporate warfare relies heavily on letting your opponent believe they are the smartest person in the room, right up until the exact moment you destroy them. That is a massive amount of capital to commit to without any prior notice, I said, deliberately injecting a slight tremor into my voice to mimic hesitation. "You are asking me to sign away a huge portion of my income under severe duress. If I agree to this out-of-court settlement, does Isabella contribute anything? Or does the entire financial burden fall entirely on me?" Thomas scoffed loudly, completely taking the bait. "Your sister has her own family to worry about, and Trey is in the middle of building a massive tech empire. They cannot be bogged down with these expenses right now. You are single. You have the liquidity. This is your responsibility, Hannah. I am giving you exactly 48 hours to review the settlement offer with your legal counsel. If I do not have a signed agreement by Friday morning, I am calling your firm. Do not test me." "I will review the documents," I replied quietly. "Make the right choice," Thomas ordered, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The slight tremor I had faked instantly vanished. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. Thomas had just handed me the exact psychological confirmation I needed. He was terrified of a trial. He was using the threat of a corporate scandal to force a rapid settlement because he knew that if this case actually went before a judge, his own financial records would be heavily scrutinized. He was bluffing with a completely empty hand, relying entirely on my fear to close the deal. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed my ruthless corporate litigator. He answered promptly, expecting my instructions regarding the morning summons. "We are not settling," I stated, my voice carrying the lethal precision of a striking predator. "Thomas just called to extort me. He threatened to send the lawsuit to my Human Resources Department if I do not sign an out-of-court agreement for $8,000 a month. He is terrified of going to trial." My lawyer chuckled softly on the other end of the line. "Extortion is a desperate strategy for a man claiming to be legally indigent. How do you want to proceed? In the American legal system, discovery is a brutal, invasive process. It is the phase of litigation where neither side can hide their paperwork. For a risk analyst, it is the ultimate weapon. I want you to file an immediate response refusing the settlement I commanded, and then I want you to file a motion for full, uncompromising financial discovery. Subpoena every single bank account, credit card, and retirement fund belonging to Thomas and Carol. Request a mandatory audit of their asset transfers over the past 24 months. If Thomas wants to use the legal system to claim he is impoverished, we are going to force him to legally swear under penalty of perjury exactly where his $250,000 retirement fund went. Consider it done, my lawyer replied, the excitement evident in his professional tone. We will demand a full accounting of all wire transfers. The judge will require a complete financial autopsy before ever considering a filial responsibility claim. Execute the discovery motion immediately, I said. We are going to drag Trey's fraudulent startup and Isabella's credit card debt straight into the harsh light of a courtroom. Let us see how much my father enjoys the legal system when it is actively ripping his own secrets apart. I ended the call and walked back over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The trap was fully primed. Thomas thought he was playing a game of intimidation, but he had just walked blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. The legal mechanism of discovery is not swift. It took 3 grueling weeks of brutal legal maneuvering to secure the data. Thomas and his sleazy lawyer fought tooth and nail to quash the subpoena. They filed desperate motions to seal their banking records, citing elder abuse and extreme emotional harassment. They claimed I was a wealthy, vindictive corporate executive trying to bankrupt my paralyzed mother through legal fees. But my personal attorney, a vicious litigator named Richard, tore through their flimsy objections like wet tissue paper. The judge granted our motion for full financial discovery without a second thought. Thomas was legally compelled to hand over every single bank statement, tax return, and credit card ledger from the past 5 years, all sworn under penalty of perjury. When the heavy banker's boxes of documents finally arrived at Richard's downtown law office, I took a personal day from the investment firm. I walked into the glass-paneled conference room, holding my usual black coffee, my posture perfectly straight. Mr. Thorne, my private forensic accountant, was already there sitting next to Richard. They had spent the entire weekend cross-referencing Thomas's sworn legal affidavits against the hard data we had previously unearthed. He lied, Richard stated flatly, the absolute second I sat down at the table. He lied on his initial court filing, and he tried to sanitize these discovery documents. But Mr. Thorne caught the discrepancies immediately. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a cold wave of anticipation settle in my chest. Show me the true bankruptcy, I commanded. Richard slid a thick blue legal binder across the polished mahogany table. Let us start with the foundation of their entire lawsuit, the medical bills. Thomas filed a petition under the filial responsibility law claiming that your mother's stroke completely wiped out their life savings. That is a carefully fabricated narrative. Mr. Thorne tapped a spreadsheet displaying Carol's official hospital statements. Your mother possessed an incredibly robust premium Medicare Advantage plan. The stroke was tragic, yes, but her actual out-of-pocket medical expenses over the past 2 months amounted to exactly $14,200. For a couple who boasted a net worth approaching $1 million just a few years ago, $14,000 is a minor manageable setback. It is absolutely not a fast track to total insolvency. I stared at the numbers printed on the crisp white paper. They had weaponized my mother's illness. They used her physical paralysis as a convenient smokescreen to hide their catastrophic financial failures. They wanted a judge to look at a woman in a wheelchair and force me to open my checkbook out of pure societal guilt. If the medical bills did not bankrupt them, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table, then we moved to the parasites. Exactly, Richard said, a predatory grin forming on his face. This is where your father committed flagrant perjury. He attempted to redact several massive outgoing wire transfers from his primary retirement account, claiming they were classified business investments. He legally swore that these funds were lost due to market volatility. That is a federal crime when you are under a discovery order. Mr. Thorne pulled up the unredacted wire logs we had secured directly from the banking institution. Thomas liquidated exactly $250,000 from his 401k 14 months ago. He absorbed a massive tax penalty to get that cash out quickly. Within 48 hours of the liquidation, The entire $250,000 was wired to a commercial account registered to Apex Innovations, LLC. Trey's fake tech startup, I murmured, feeling the sheer weight of their audacity pressing into the room. My father gutted his own future to fund his son-in-law's delusion. It gets so much worse, Mr. Thorne continued, adjusting his glasses. We audited the operational expenses of Apex Innovations. The company is completely dead in the water. Trey has no viable product, no actual clients, and zero generated revenue. What he does have is a staggering burn rate. He used your parents' retirement money to sign a lease on a commercial office space downtown that he rarely visits. He authorized corporate funds to lease a luxury Porsche SUV, categorizing it as a client acquisition vehicle. He expensed five-star dinners, custom-tailored suits, and first-class flights to networking events where he secured absolutely zero venture capital. He played the role of a highly successful tech founder while bleeding your parents entirely dry. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Trey had stood in the lobby of my corporate building wearing a bespoke suit funded by my father's retirement and screamed at me about family values. He called me a monster for not taking Carol into my home, all while he was actively spending the money that should have paid for her assisted living facility. The absolute staggering hypocrisy was almost beautiful in its dark perfection. And the golden child, I asked, turning my attention back to the legal binder. Isabella could not possibly maintain her influencer aesthetic without a steady stream of capital. If Trey was burning the startup cash on his own ego, how was she affording her lifestyle? Richard pulled out a stack of credit card statements that were so thick they required a heavy binder clip. This is the final nail in the coffin of their lawsuit, he stated. Isabella is listed as an authorized user on 3 of your father's high-yield credit cards. Over the past 24 months, she has systematically maxed out every single one of them. I scanned the itemized billing statements. The charges were a masterclass in superficial excess. Thousands of dollars spent at luxury baby boutiques for staged nursery photos. Exorbitant bills from high-end cosmetic dermatologists. Receipts from destination resorts where she filmed her fabricated picture-perfect life. She was charging luxury organic groceries, designer handbags, and daily artisanal coffees directly to Thomas. The total unsecured debt sat at an astonishing $50,000. She swiped her father's credit card for a $3,000 stroller just so she could post a single photo with it while Carol was struggling to pay her premium insurance deductibles. They enabled her. I whispered, the final pieces of my childhood trauma clicking into place. They abandoned me in a chemotherapy ward because I was an inconvenience. But they willingly handed Isabella a blank check to fund her fake internet reality. They literally bankrupted themselves to buy her affection and maintain the illusion of a perfect, wealthy family. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, Richard confirmed, closing the binder. He allowed Trey and Isabella to operate like financial parasites. When the money completely ran out and the credit cards were declined, the stroke happened. That was the moment Thomas panicked. He realized he had absolutely no safety net left. So he looked at you. The successful, estranged daughter with a massive corporate salary. He filed this filial responsibility lawsuit hoping to force you to replenish the well. He wanted you to pay for Carol's care so he would not have to admit to his friends or to himself that he had thrown his entire life savings away on a fraudulent son-in-law and a spoiled daughter. I sat back in the plush leather chair, letting the profound silence of the law office wash over me. The feeling expanding in my chest was not grief. It was absolute, unadulterated liberation. For years, a tiny, irrational part of my brain had wondered if I was too harsh for cutting them off. Now, staring at the cold, hard data, I knew that walking away had been the only thing that saved me from being entirely consumed by their toxicity. They think they have me cornered, I said softly, looking at Richard and Mr. Thorne. They think this lawsuit is going to break me. With this discovery evidence, Richard replied confidently, we can get the lawsuit dismissed with prejudice tomorrow. The judge will throw it out the second he sees the perjury regarding the retirement funds. No, I countered, a lethal strategy fully forming in my mind. Do not dismiss it yet. Let Thomas keep paying his sleazy lawyer. Let Trey and Isabella continue to believe they have won. I want to look them in the eye at the mediation table. I want to watch their faces when they realize I know absolutely everything. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile matching my own. He closed the thick blue binder with a satisfying thud. "We will let them walk into that mediation room next week, completely blind," he said. "We will let Thomas play his hand before we drop the guillotine." I left the law office that afternoon feeling a profound, dangerous sense of clarity. But as my personal driver navigated the busy Chicago streets, my highly trained analytical brain refused to shut down. A risk analyst knows that where there is one massive financial liability, there are always hidden secondary fractures. Thomas had drained his retirement to fund his fraudulent son-in-law. Isabella had maxed out his credit cards to fund her internet aesthetic. But what about the ultimate status symbol? What about the foundational asset of their entire fake reality? I was thinking about the house, the sprawling 5-bedroom Tudor-style estate in the most exclusive gated suburb of the city, was the physical manifestation of my mother's ego. It was her ticket to the local country club. It was the heavily photographed backdrop for all of Isabella's social media posts. Growing up, that house was a monument to their blatant favoritism. Isabella was given the massive master suite extension, complete with a walk-in closet to hold her designer clothes. I was banished to the converted basement room surrounded by exposed pipes and damp walls, a daily physical reminder of my status as the family afterthought. They would never willingly jeopardize that house. But desperate men make desperate, catastrophic errors. The moment I stepped out of my private elevator and into my penthouse, I bypassed my usual corporate reports. I opened my secure terminal and logged directly into the County Public Real Estate Records database. I typed in the address of my childhood home. I watched the cursor spin for a fraction of a second before the digital property ledger materialized on my high-definition screen. I scrolled past the original purchase deed. I moved past a refinancing agreement from 10 years ago. And then my eyes locked onto a document filed exactly 6 months prior. It was a formal notice of default. I let out a sharp breath. Thomas had completely stopped paying the mortgage half a year ago. The timeline aligned perfectly with the exact moment Trey officially drained the last drops of the retirement fund. Thomas had essentially chosen to fund Isabella's luxury lifestyle and Trey's fake technology startup over keeping a roof over his own head. The bank had initiated formal foreclosure proceedings quietly behind closed doors, while my parents continued to host neighborhood dinner parties and pretend everything was perfectly fine. I dug deeper into the municipal filings. I clicked on the attached public auction notice. The county sheriff's office had formally seized the property. The public auction was scheduled to take place online in exactly 72 hours. Thomas was currently residing in a house he no longer legally owned, completely oblivious to the fact that the bank was actively liquidating his primary asset. He was filing frivolous, aggressive lawsuits to extort his estranged daughter for $8,000 a month, while literally sitting on a ticking financial time bomb. This was the holy grail of financial leverage. This was the ultimate, undeniable kill shot. I did not hesitate for a single second. I picked up my phone and called my elite wealth management team. I instructed them to immediately establish a blind, anonymous, limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. I named the entity Ironclad Holdings, LLC, to sound like a faceless, intimidating corporate conglomerate. The legal structure of a Delaware LLC guarantees absolute, impenetrable privacy. My personal name would not appear on a single public property document or bank transfer. Next, I authorized a massive liquid cash transfer from my private investment portfolio directly into the LLC purchasing account. I did not need to apply for a mortgage. I did not need bank financing or a credit check. I had the cold, hard cash ready to deploy, earned entirely through my own ruthless corporate success. 3 days later, I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, watching the county auction portal count down on my secondary monitor. The starting bid for my childhood home was laughably low. It was a mere fraction of its actual market value, designed only to cover the outstanding debt Thomas owed the bank. The digital auction opened. A few local real estate flippers placed automated incremental bids, trying to score a cheap suburban property to quickly renovate and flip. I watched the numbers tick up slowly. I did not engage. It is a classic risk management strategy. You never show your hand until the opponent has absolutely no time to react. When the auction clock hit the final 60 seconds, I bypassed the incremental bidding war entirely. I typed in a sweeping definitive cash bid that instantly blew every single competitor out of the water. It was still pennies on the dollar compared to the true value of the sprawling estate, but it was aggressive enough to completely crush the room. The screen froze for a fraction of a second before the system validated my verified funds. The digital gavel fell. The auction permanently closed. Ironclad Holdings, LLC, was officially the sole legal owner of the property. I sat back against my bar stool and took a deep, shuddering breath. The sheer magnitude of what I had just accomplished settled heavily over my shoulders. I now held the absolute legal deed to the very house where my mother had told me my cancer diagnosis was an inconvenience. I officially owned the hardwood floors my father used to pace while threatening to cut me off financially. They were currently sleeping in beds that belonged to my corporate portfolio. They were planting flowers in a yard that was legally mine. They were, by every definition of the law, unauthorized tenants at sufferance residing on my private property. Thomas thought he was walking into a legal mediation next week holding all the power. He thought he could use the threat of corporate embarrassment to force me into paying his wife's medical bills. He had absolutely no idea that I held the keys to his entire existence in a digital folder on my desk. I printed the official transfer of deed, verifying the state seal of approval at the bottom of the page. I slipped the crisp, heavy document into the leather binder alongside the financial audits Mr. Thorne had prepared. My weapon was now fully loaded, the safety was off, and my finger was resting gently on the trigger. I was not just going to defend myself against their filial responsibility lawsuit. I was going to surgically dismantle their entire reality. I packed my briefcase for the upcoming mediation, feeling a level of absolute terrifying power I had never known before. The morning of the mediation arrived with a heavy, relentless downpour that washed the Chicago streets a cold, slick gray. I stepped out of my private car and walked into the soaring glass atrium of the downtown Legal Mediation Center. My personal attorney Richard walked smoothly beside me, carrying the heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of my biological family. I wore a pristine white tailored suit. It was a deliberate, highly calculated wardrobe choice. White projects absolute authority, total financial invulnerability, and a chilling lack of fear. I was not walking into a negotiation. I was walking into an execution. We were escorted into a sterile, hyper-modern conference room on the 40th floor. The space was designed to intimidate weak opponents. The walls were constructed of soundproof frosted glass. The massive table taking up the center of the room was carved from a single slab of dark mahogany. I took my seat on the far side of the table, placing my hands perfectly flat on the cool wood. Richard sat to my right, unpacking his legal notepads with methodical precision. We did not speak. We simply waited for the liability to enter the room. The heavy glass door swung open exactly 4 minutes late. It is a classic, cheap intimidation tactic used by amateur negotiators to assert dominance. My father Thomas strode into the room first. He wore a stiff, outdated charcoal suit, his chin tilted aggressively upward. He carried himself with the unearned, staggering arrogance of a patriarch who firmly believed he was about to conquer a disobedient child. He did not look at me. He looked directly at the empty leather chair at the head of the table, claiming it as his own. Behind him came the theatrical production. A private medical transport attendant wheeled my mother Carol into the conference room. Carol was playing her role with Oscar-worthy dedication. She wore a drab, oversized sweater to emphasize her physical frailty. She kept her head bowed, her partially paralyzed hand resting limply on her lap, letting out a series of weak, exhausted sighs. She wanted every single person in the room to look at her wheelchair and immediately brand me as a heartless, evil corporate monster. Following closely behind the wheelchair were the true financial parasites. Isabella walked in, clutching a $5,000 designer handbag, her face arranged into a mask of triumphant moral superiority. She looked at my pristine white suit and actually scoffed aloud, rolling her eyes, as if my professional success was a personal insult to her manufactured struggles. Beside Isabella walked Trey. My brother-in-law was dressed in yet another custom-tailored imported wool suit. He carried a sleek, high-tech portfolio under his arm, perfectly playing the role of the wildly successful startup founder, who had simply taken time out of his incredibly busy executive schedule to support his tragic family. He pulled out a chair for Isabella, with exaggerated gentlemanly flair, shooting me a glare filled with pure sanctimonious disgust. Finally, their legal representation entered and closed the heavy door. Their lawyer was a sharp-featured, slick-looking man named Mr. Harding. He possessed the greasy, aggressive energy of a man who made his living exclusively through out-of-court extortion. He slapped a thick manila folder onto the mahogany table and sat down next to Thomas, rubbing his hands together. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries," Mr. Harding began, his voice loud and artificially commanding. "We are all busy professionals, and my clients have endured a staggering amount of emotional and physical trauma due to your client's profound neglect. We are here to finalize the terms of the filial responsibility settlement so this family can begin the grueling process of healing." I remained completely motionless. I did not blink. I kept my eyes locked dead onto my father's face. Mr. Harding slid a stapled legal contract across the smooth surface of the table until it stopped directly in front of Richard. My clients initially demanded $8,000 a month to cover the cost of Carol's assisted living and medical care. Mr. Harding continued, leaning forward to press his advantage. However, due to the extreme psychological distress caused by Hannah's refusal to cooperate immediately, and taking into account the projected inflation of long-term medical inflation, that number has been officially revised. The new demand is $10,000 a month, paid directly into a trust managed by Thomas. I let out a slow, quiet breath. The sheer magnificent greed was staggering. $10,000 a month was not a medical care budget. It was an executive salary. It was a lifestyle subsidy designed to keep Isabella's credit cards active and Trey's fraudulent startup afloat. You will also provide a lump sum payment of $75,000 to cover retroactive medical debts and our legal fees, Mr. Harding added, tossing a cheap plastic pen onto the contract. Thomas finally looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, hard, and entirely devoid of any paternal affection. "You brought this on yourself, Hannah," he stated, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just answered the phone and done your duty as a daughter, we could have avoided these massive legal fees. But you chose to be selfish. Now you have to pay the price." Trey decided this was his moment to insert his fake moral authority into the legal record. He crossed his arms over his bespoke suit and shook his head in performative disappointment. $10,000 a month is an absolute bargain to save your career," Hannah Trey said, his baritone voice echoing off the glass walls. "You make millions of dollars pushing numbers around on a screen while we are in the trenches actually building companies and raising a family. You should be thanking us for allowing you to settle this behind closed doors. In my culture, abandoning your mother is an unforgivable sin. We are giving you a chance to buy your soul back." Isabella sniffled loudly, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. "I just want my mom to be safe," she whispered to the room, ensuring the mediator could hear her fake agony. "I cannot sleep at night, knowing she might be thrown out on the street because my own sister is hoarding her wealth." Mr. Harding tapped his finger against the mahogany table, drawing the focus back to the contract. "The terms are completely non-negotiable. You sign that document today, and you set up the direct deposit by Friday morning. If you refuse, or if you attempt to counteroffer, we leave this room and we go directly to trial." Mr. Harding leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a threatening conspiratorial whisper. "And before we file the trial motion, I will personally courier a completely unredacted copy of this filial responsibility lawsuit directly to the global head of human resources at your investment firm. I will attach a summary detailing your refusal to assist a paralyzed woman. Your firm manages billions in conservative pension funds. They will fire you before your lunch break to avoid the public relations nightmare. You sign the paper right now, Hannah, or we completely destroy your public image and end your career today. The silence in the mediation room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Thomas smirked, leaning back in his leather chair, thoroughly convinced he had just successfully extorted his own flesh and blood. Trey checked his luxury watch with an arrogant flick of his wrist. Isabella crossed her legs, waiting for me to break down and surrender my wealth. I looked at the cheap plastic pen resting on top of the extortion contract. Then I slowly turned my head and looked at Richard. My attorney did not look worried. He looked like a man who was about to unleash an absolute bloodbath. I gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. It was time to pull the pin on the grenade. Trey misinterpreted my silence. He mistook my tactical patience for corporate panic. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, a wide, magnanimous smile spreading across his face as he confidently unbuttoned his custom suit jacket. He actually believed he was about to secure a permanent funding stream for his luxurious lifestyle. "Look," Hannah Trey said, his tone shifting into the smooth, practiced pitch of a Silicon Valley grifter trying to court a naive venture capitalist. "I know 10,000 a month sounds like a massive heavy lift, even for a corporate executive like you. But I am not going to let you take a loss on this deal. My tech startup, Apex Innovations, is currently entering the final stages of our Series C funding round. We are actively preparing for a massive initial public offering by the fourth quarter of this fiscal year." I kept my face completely expressionless, allowing him to dig his own grave as deep as he possibly could. "Consider this an early-stage investment." Trey continued, gesturing broadly with his hands to emphasize his fake authority. "You sign this contract to take care of Carol today, and I give you my personal guarantee as a founder and chief executive officer. The absolute second my company hits the stock market and we IPO, I will pay you back double. I will hand you $20,000 for every $10,000 you put in, plus a highly generous equity package in Apex Innovations. You are not just saving your mother, you are getting in on the ground floor of a unicorn tech company. I am literally offering to make you exponentially wealthier." Isabella nodded enthusiastically beside him, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap. "We are just trying to find a solution where everybody wins. Hannah," she added sweetly, completely dropping her weeping victim routine, now that she thought the monthly cash was secured. "Trey is going to be incredibly successful. You should be thanking him for offering you such a lucrative return on your investment." I looked at the cheap plastic pen resting on top of their extortion contract. I reached out with my right hand. I did not pick it up. I placed my index finger against the plastic casing and slowly, deliberately pushed it across the smooth mahogany surface. It slid all the way back to Mr. Harding, hitting his yellow legal pad with a sharp, dismissive click. "I am not signing your contract," I stated, my voice echoing like cracking ice in the quiet conference room. "And I am absolutely not investing a single cent into your fraudulent existence." Thomas slammed his fist down on the table, his face turning an angry mottled red. "You stupid, arrogant girl," he shouted, losing his temper instantly. "I gave you a chance to do this quietly. Mr. Harding, prepare the court filings. We are going to trial. We are destroying her career today." Mr. Harding reached for the contract, fully prepared to carry out the threat. Before he could move another muscle, Richard unclasped his heavy leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out the thick blue legal binder containing the completely unredacted financial discovery records Mr. Thorne had meticulously compiled. Richard did not slide it gently. He slammed it down directly in the center of the table. The heavy thud made Isabella jump in her seat. "We highly encourage you to go to trial, Thomas," Richard said, his voice laced with pure predatory joy, "because the discovery phase is already complete, and it appears you committed flagrant federal perjury on your sworn financial affidavits." Mr. Harding froze. His hand hovered over the table. The aggressive, slick demeanor of the extortion lawyer instantly vanished, replaced by the sharp, terrifying realization that his own client had lied to him. "What is this?" Mr. Harding demanded, pulling the blue binder toward himself. "That is a complete financial autopsy of your client's so-called medical bankruptcy," I answered, taking total control of the room. My risk analyst training kicked into overdrive. I looked directly at my father. Thomas, you filed a filial responsibility lawsuit claiming that Carol's stroke completely wiped out your life savings. You legally swore that you were destitute due to catastrophic out-of-pocket medical expenses. Thomas swallowed hard, his jaw muscle twitching nervously. That is the truth. It is a verifiable, easily disproven lie, I countered, my voice rising in volume and absolute authority. Carol's Medicare Advantage plan covered almost everything. Her actual out-of-pocket medical expenses over the past 2 months totaled exactly $14,200. That is not a bankruptcy event for a man who boasted a net worth approaching $1 million. So let us talk about where the real money went. I leaned forward, locking my cold eyes with my father. Tell your lawyer exactly what you did 14 months ago, Thomas. Tell him about the $250,000. Thomas turned completely pale. He looked at Mr. Harding, then looked away suddenly, unable to make eye contact with anyone in the room. Since you suddenly lost your voice, I will explain it for the legal record, I said, tapping my manicured nail against the table. 14 months ago, Thomas initiated a massive penalty liquidation of his primary 401k retirement account. He pulled out exactly $250,000 in cash. Within 48 hours, he wired that entire sum to a commercial banking account registered to Apex Innovations, LLC. Mr. Harding violently flipped open the blue binder, his eyes scanning the certified banking records and unredacted wire logs we had provided. He saw the numbers, he saw the dates, he saw the absolute undeniable proof of his client's perjury. You did not go broke paying for a hospital bed, I continued, my voice merciless. You voluntarily gutted your own future to fund Trey's fake technology startup. You handed your retirement to a con artist. Trey jumped up from his leather chair, his bespoke suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Watch your mouth, he yelled, pointing a finger at me. My company is entirely legitimate. I am building a software empire. Isabella chimed in, her voice shrill and panicked. Trey is a chief executive officer. You are just jealous because you work for someone else. I ignored them completely, keeping my focus locked entirely on the broken patriarch sitting across from me. And let us not forget the other massive financial hemorrhage in this portfolio, I said, turning my gaze to Isabella. Thomas, why did you not inform your attorney about the 3 high-yield credit cards you allowed your golden child to use? The ones she systematically maxed out over the past 24 months to fund her luxury internet lifestyle. $50,000 in unsecured debt spent entirely on designer handbags, luxury cosmetics, and international vacations. I watched Mr. Harding physically recoil from Thomas. A lawyer can defend many things, but they cannot defend a client who actively lies to them during the discovery phase of a financial lawsuit. Thomas had walked his own attorney into a massive ethical liability. You filed a fraudulent extortion lawsuit against a cancer survivor. I stated, the absolute weight of my victory crushing the remaining air out of the room. You drained your own wealth to buy Isabella's affection and fund Trey's delusions of grandeur. You are not victims of the American healthcare system. You are victims of your own staggering ego and blinding favoritism. And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for trying to weaponize my success against me. Trey did not possess the intelligence to recognize a lost battle. Instead of remaining silent and consulting his completely horrified lawyer, he doubled down on his absolute delusion. He slammed his hands onto the dark mahogany table, leaning toward me with a desperate, arrogant sneer. You can try to spin those banking records however you want, Hannah Trey shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the sterile conference room. But my company is scaling rapidly. The venture capital is flowing. I am closing a massive seed round next month with one of the largest investment funds in the Midwest. Apex Innovations is going to be worth hundreds of millions. Thomas made a brilliant early-stage investment, and you are just too blind to see the vision. I turned my gaze away from my father and locked it entirely onto Trey. I let a cold, genuine smile spread across my face. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a sleek black folder stamped with the heavily embossed silver logo of my investment firm. I did not slide this folder across the table to Mr. Harding. I slid it directly to Trey. Let us talk about that massive seed round. I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. You submitted your pitch deck and your operational financial records to our venture capital division exactly 35 days ago. You requested a capital injection of $2 million to scale your operations. Trey froze. His hands still resting flat on the table visibly twitched. Our firm receives thousands of pitch decks every single quarter. I continued leaning back in my chair and observing him with clinical detachment. We have an elite team of senior analysts whose sole corporate function is to dissect those pitches, identify fraudulent metrics, and ruthlessly eliminate bad investments. I am the lead director of that specific risk analysis team. Isabella let out a sharp, audible gasp. She looked at her husband, then looked at me, her eyes wide with sudden dawning terror. I personally reviewed your entire corporate submission, Trey. I stated my words, cutting through the tense air like a scalpel. I scrutinized every single line of code you claim to possess. I audited your projected user acquisition costs. I examined the operational blueprint of Apex Innovations. And do you want to know what I found? Trey opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The booming, confident chief executive officer persona was evaporating in real time, replaced by the sheer, suffocating panic of a cornered con artist. I found a complete, unadulterated shell company, I declared, making sure every single person in the room heard the absolute finality of my verdict. You have no proprietary software. You have 0 active enterprise clients. You have generated absolutely no operational revenue since the day you registered the LLC. Your entire business model is a sequence of empty buzzwords copied and pasted from tech blogs. I officially rejected your funding request 28 days ago, and I permanently blacklisted your name across our entire network of partner funds. You are never getting venture capital. You are completely toxic. Trey sank back into his heavy leather chair, the color completely draining from his face. The bespoke midnight blue suit suddenly looked like a tragic costume draped over a terrified fraud. But the rejection was not the most interesting part of my risk analysis. I continued refusing to give him a single second to recover his breath. When a startup founder requests $2 million, we automatically run a forensic trace on their initial seed capital to verify their financial competency. We wanted to see exactly how you managed the $250,000 you acquired from your initial angel investor, which we now know was my father. I pointed a manicured finger at the black folder resting in front of him. Open it, Trey. Read the itemized ledger of your own corporate embezzlement. He did not move. He was completely paralyzed by the exposure. So I read the devastating data out loud for the entire room to hear. You did not hire a single software developer, I stated, my voice echoing with lethal precision. You did not purchase servers or cloud architecture. Instead, you signed a highly overpriced commercial lease for an office space you visit maybe twice a month. You expensed custom-tailored suits. And most egregiously, you authorized a corporate wire transfer of $95,000 directly to a luxury car dealership. You used Thomas's retirement money to purchase that dark blue Porsche SUV you constantly flaunt on your social media accounts. You categorized a luxury sports car as a necessary client acquisition vehicle for a company that has literally 0 clients. Isabella violently shoved her chair back from the table. She turned to stare at Trey, her face contorted in absolute horror. You told me the company paid for the car, she shrieked, her voice cracking with genuine panic. You told me you secured an early-stage investor who believed in your vision. He did secure an investor, Isabella Weiss answered for him, keeping my tone ruthlessly steady. He secured our father. Thomas handed him the financial safety net that was supposed to keep our mother out of a state-run nursing home. And Trey drove it straight off the dealership lot at 100 miles an hour. Mr. Harding? The aggressive extortion lawyer began violently packing his yellow legal pads into his briefcase. He had heard enough. He recognized massive federal wire fraud when it was laid out in a verified corporate portfolio. He knew that associating with this family any longer was a direct threat to his own legal license. Thomas sat completely motionless, staring blankly at the mahogany table. The realization that he had willingly handed his entire life savings to a charismatic fraudster had finally broken through his massive ego. He had bankrupted his own wife to buy the approval of a man who was actively robbing him blind. You committed corporate embezzlement, I told Trey, my tone utterly merciless. You committed wire fraud. You drained an elderly man's retirement account under false pretenses. If my firm decides to forward this rejected pitch deck and the accompanying financial audit to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you will not be attending luxury networking events. You will be facing a federal indictment. Isabella grabbed her hair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her scalp. The luxury influencer lifestyle she had carefully curated was built entirely on a foundation of stolen money and fraudulent credit. She was legally married to a man who was about to be investigated for severe financial crimes, which meant she was legally tethered to his massive, inescapable debt. The crushing reality of her situation was visibly suffocating her. She let out a loud, breathless sob, but this time it was not a theatrical performance for sympathy. It was the raw sound of a woman realizing her entire world had just collapsed. I looked at the shattered remains of the golden child and the fraudulent chief executive officer. They had come to this mediation room intending to extort $10,000 a month from me. They intended to ruin my corporate reputation. Instead, I had methodically dismantled their fake empire, leaving them utterly exposed to the severe, unforgiving consequences of their own greed. But I was not finished. The true parasites had been neutralized, but the patriarch who had orchestrated this entire legal ambush still needed to be dealt with. I turned my attention back to Thomas. It was time for the final devastating blow. The air in the conference room was thick enough to choke on. Mr. Harding had completely abandoned his professional decorum. He snapped his briefcase shut, muttered a hasty legal disclaimer about terminating his representation, effective immediately, and practically sprinted for the heavy glass doors. He did not look back. Thomas watched